So if you run a martial arts school and you read my post about cutting the onion and getting rid of some of the fluff that we have in curriculum so our students actually get better at the basics, this is going to be the video for you. I am with what's your official title? COO, right?
Sure. Yes, sir. That's
Yeah, I think that's your official title. COO, the Chief Operations Officer of Action Karate. I have 34 locations. My brother, Simon Brenner's right-hand man, Sensei Michael, has been with the organization for a really long time. And if you are getting to this video, you probably read my Black Belt Business Newsletter post about how you were sitting watching our Black Belt testing, and we're watching our students, and they were doing many different techniques and katas. And we were watching them do the basics like a side kick or a roundhouse kick. We were not very impressed by how those looked. In fact, pretty embarrassed. I think most school owners would never even admit this publicly. And I think honestly, if we had other school owners like there watching, we'd probably be embarrassed. And we got to change this because over time we added so many layers. You go to one seminar and then another seminar workshop, but we add. And before you know it, we added so many things to the curriculum and we preserved everything in our tradition that before you know it, we had so many layers, so much required of our students that they do a lot of things just okay instead of being really good at a smaller amount of things. And we just felt like we weren't doing them a service. We had to look, and by the way, that's not their fault. That's our fault, right? As teachers, it's just a reflection of ourselves. So every time you have a black belt test, you should be thinking, or really any belt test, but specifically black belts, how good are they at what we actually taught them? And this is like almost like a self audit. Like, what do you need to do better for your next series of black belts so they're even better prepared, even better students? And if you're not doing that, then you're doing your students a disservice. So we're going to talk about exactly what curriculum we kept, what we got rid of, and like how we actually came to that process. So if you're thinking, man, we have a lot of layers, and you're thinking like honestly, your students are thinking, man, they need to be better at some of the basics, then this is going to be for you. So we're going to tell you what we cut out, what we kept, and what we actually brought back after cutting out after a while. So, Michael, thanks for coming on today.
oh, my pleasure.
So the first thing is, if your students are really great at the basics, like if you ask yourself, are my students mastering the basics? Like they're really good at punching, kicking, blocking, or if you do another style, whatever your basics are. If they're really good at that stuff and you're really proud of what they look like, you probably don't need to do this. Okay. So don't go changing your curriculum just because you read this post or watch this video. Only do this if you feel like you really need it, if you really want them to get better. Okay. And the questions you should ask yourself, I'm going to give you some questions you should ask yourself in order to figure out, like, should you even go this route? So the first thing is, could a parent or a casual observer recognize progress in your student's basics over time? Like if you're just a parent, you're watching your child and you go watch them go from white belt to black belt, do they actually see like progress? They don't have to be Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee to recognize progress over time, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, are your students getting bored or are they engaged while drilling the fundamentals, right? So maybe you're drilling the fundamentals the same way over and over again instead of hiding repetition and they get bored with it. So they don't actually practice it or you don't spend as much time with it because you don't want them to get bored. All right. The next thing is, are you testing your students on performance or memorization? So do students pass belt tests because they understand how to do a move or just because they remember the form? And there's a big difference between doing a kata or form or technique from memory versus like internalizing it and completely understanding each move and how it actually works and how to apply it. The next thing is, what percentage of the curriculum is actually being retained and used? Right? Are they memorizing a kata or technique just for the test and they forget about it immediately afterwards? Or is it something they're able to internalize and be able to practice? These are all questions you need to ask yourself and your team if you're going to update and change your curriculum. Next one is, does your technique form exist for tradition or transformation? Like, are you doing a technique just because that's what someone did 2 or 3 generations ago and that worked for them at that time, and now you're just going to continue that tradition? Are you being handcuffed or bullied by dead people? Or is it actually making our students better, right? Is it making them better be able to defend themselves? If that's the goal of your style, right? The next one is, how much of your curriculum is filler? Are there drills that look cool, but don't build actual skills? For instance, are you doing burpees? Right? Burpees could be great if you want your students to be more fit to defend themselves. That's great. But if you're doing them just to fill time, maybe that might not be the right fit for you and your students, right? That's just an example. And you want to look at each technique and figure out, or each form, figure out, is this filler or is it actually needed to make them a better martial artist? The next thing is, could a newer instructor confidently teach whatever you're teaching without confusion? If your instructors have to remember 25 techniques and 100 or 10 katas or something, actually, let's say 100 techniques and 25 katas, it's going to be very difficult for them to teach it. It's going to be difficult for your students to understand it. What if you have to teach multiple classes a day and if it's too difficult for them to do everything at once, and really make sure your students are actually good? The next one is, what are my students actually training for? Are you a competition school? Are you a demonstration school? Are you teaching life skills, self-defense, or a mix? And is your curriculum actually guiding towards one of those areas, or you just follow tradition and try to strong arm and say, oh, we're a competition school, or oh, we're a life skill school, but you're not actually teaching towards that mission, right? Next one is, do my students have time to practice outside of class? Are we designing curriculum assuming that our students are training 2 days a week, 3 days a week? Are we designing curriculum that they're actually going to practice outside of training in martial arts? Because we have to remember, kids are doing more now than they ever have. They're doing piano, stuff, gymnastics, dance, not just doing one thing. If they come to class for, let's say your class is 45 minutes and they come twice a week, that's only 90 minutes a week, right? That's not that long. That's, what is that, 6 hours a month? That's not that much. So the question is your curriculum designed where it has to be a practice on their own, or is coming to class sufficient enough? All right. And the last question you want to ask yourself is, you had to cut 30% of your curriculum today. Like, what would go first? Like, what would you miss the least? What would actually make teaching easier and more effective to your staff and make your students better? So those are the questions you want to kind of go through when you're like thinking about going through this. But I'm going to ask with Seth and Michael, we're going to go through exactly what we did. So I know when we first started to go through this, it was hard because you and we grew up doing all the traditional martial arts stuff, right? We did, how many techniques did we do for testing?
So our black belt test was 81 self-defense techniques and probably like 10 or 12 forms or katas. To put some color around that though, your brother's test was 81 times 3, whatever that is, 243 self-defense.
Yeah.
So I think we are lucky that our culture, even, and I'm sure you'll talk about it, was hard for us like to trim, but we come from a culture of, moving in that direction, I think.
Yeah, and I remember when I was younger and I first tested for my black belt, there was way more to it. There was also sparring involved. You had to spar all the instructors, and like, not to say that that's bad now. I think you could totally do that. It just depends what you want. But there was like way more involved. And back then, also students would come to class for an hour, multiple days a week, sometimes 3 or 4 days a week. And now classes are 45 minutes or 30 minutes, depending on the age. So you have to adjust to the time. So let's go over like what we actually cut piece by piece and how it actually affected our students. So we used to do 81 self-defense techniques. And by the way, our for us, like, you'd have to adjust this for your style, but for us, we teach Kempo karate traditionally. Okay. So there was 81 self-defense techniques. If you ever done Kempo karate, you probably know a lot of these, like, like 5 swords and stuff like that, bowing to Buddha, and all these other techniques that we love because we grew up with and we're used to it, but maybe our students it's not necessarily always needed, right? Some of them are like, oh, this is never really applicable. So how did we go to figure out which ones to cut and which ones to keep?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I kind of think we did it in 2 waves. Probably the first wave was taking, what we would call like traditional American Kempo, like our 81, and kind of just pare that down. We still taught 81, but for like the Kempo people on here, like Dance of Death, we wouldn't do the whole version. We'd probably stop at the takedown and, move on from there. So we probably just like started trimming the actual technique itself over time, was probably the first wave. But then the second wave, and I think you kind of said this in your questions, was us really starting with the end in mind. Like, at the end of the day, what do we want our black belts to be good at? And for us, it was 2 things. They should know how to defend themselves. But, we really came to the best self-defense truly, besides, not being in a bad situation, is block or cover and then strike. I mean,
Mhm.
and all the other stuff is cool, but, that's self-defense. And then you also said this, they should also be physically fit. Doesn't mean they have to be you who, works out constantly, but they're on a health and fitness journey because they're probably going to have to defend themselves against heart disease, not a right hook. So I think as we got to that second wave, we really started to think like, okay, what are the basics they need to really be able to defend themselves? So that's kind of where we went from 81 to like 27 like core attacks. And, in our opinion, at least, and, we go to plenty of seminars, we've all trained a lot, like what would work in this situation. So if you watched our classes now, like you'd see that there's like a Kempo feel to it, but it's certainly not traditional American Kempo that, you might be used to.
And I think what you said is really important, where it's like attack based, because I know how we had it before with techniques, and I grew up doing it, which is like you need to know 7 different defenses for a right hook or straight right punch or a kick. And how we kind of narrow it down is like, okay, you need to know 1 or 2 defenses for a straight right punch, a hook punch, a kick, someone grabs you from behind, someone puts you in a headlock. Because you might know 7 techniques, but if you know all of them like pretty sloppy, it's not. Do you really need 7 techniques? Like, do you need to you need to be strapped with 7 guns in order to defend yourself? No, you probably just need one and know how to use it correctly. But you have 7 guns and they're all different ammo types and different weights and different kickbacks, and you're just gonna think in the moment, you're gonna take one out and defend yourself with it? Like, probably not, right? So it needs to be instinctual. How do you make it instinctual? Keep it simple. So we did attack base. So every specific technique that would provide a different attack, you should know how to defend yourself in that situation. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think it's perfect. And then we also a lot of like the traditional stuff that remember, like our team is pretty varied in experience level, right? We have people that have been around for 30 years and people that have been around for 30 months, right? So for the ones that have been around for a really long, I know this might not be your situation, not you, but audience you, depending on, your team and your schools or whatever. But for the people that love the traditional stuff, we just pulled a lot of it to our black belt curriculum. So we still get to teach it, we still get to use it, but it's, after black belt, not leading up to black belt.
What about katas or forms? How did we figure out which ones to keep and which ones to cut?
I think it's just I think the same exact way, end in mind. Nunchucks are super fun. No one's probably defending themselves with nunchucks. Super cool. Like I like playing with them, commas, super fun to play with. Nobody has commas in their backpack. So for us, it was like, okay, where does it fit in? So the way we do it now, a lot of our schools do kind of just clinics. So once a quarter, we'll pick a weapon. They'll do a couple special seminars for it. The instructors that love it, some of them still incorporated in class a little bit more, but it's not a requirement for black belt for us. I think sometimes we confuse like curriculum with black belt requirements. You can teach it and it can still be a cool tool, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a testing requirement. And you sometimes can kind of get the best of both worlds that way. Like, okay, we still use it. We have extra time. We're focusing on our basics, focusing on what we consider the core. And then when we have extra time, we work on this stuff too.
Yeah, not everything you learn in class is something you have to be tested on. I mean, it's not like that in school. But there's plenty of things you might have, like a project at school they're not going to be tested on later, or a certain topic that's fun for your education. It keeps you intrigued and exciting, but it's not going to be part of your final, right?
Exactly. So forms for us, we kind of like plucked out the weapon stuff first because we had a bunch of weapons forms that we taught as part of required curriculum. And then for the more like, Kempo-y katas that we still taught, it was the same thing. What serves the mission of they could defend themselves if they needed to, and, they're working on their fitness journey. And for us, it's exactly what you said. It's like, okay, what serves them actually getting good at the basics? So we still teach some of them to the adults. The kids, we don't do any forms. They work on like some pad work, some combinations. They work on their self-defense. But it was all just serving what's the end product that we want.
So what was the response like from our team? Because this is like hard to do, especially like you said, some more instructors been around for a while, been around for 20, 30 years, kind of like cut from the same cloth that we are. We're training for a really long time. Some of our instructors are newer. Maybe they've only been training for 4 or 5 years, right? So there's obviously going to be some backlash anytime you change anything curriculum wise, right? Like ask anyone who was a parent teaching a kid, what's that new math that kids do these days? I don't remember what it's even called.
War, and that was like a big thing. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so like you know the backlash on that. So imagine what it's like in your martial arts school when someone learns something a specific way, and now we're changing it. So how do you actually handle that with your staff if you're gonna adjust your curriculum that's different than something that they grew up on or something they learned?
It was super easy for us. Everybody loved it. And of course, that was far from the case. The newer team members didn't care at all. They're just rolling with it. Sounds great. The ones that, love the tradition piece of it, we truly didn't do a good job communicating it. Sometimes part of our culture that I think does really well for us is we have such a sense of urgency to make improvements. There is no like, okay, and then next year, then we'll fix the curriculum. Like, if we have a better way to do it, we want to do the better way now. Why would you wait to do the better way? Like, there's no such thing as wait. We need to get it done. But sometimes we move so quick and with such a big team, there's like some whiplash, right? So we genuinely didn't do a good job communicating it. And there was a lot of like talking people through it after the fact. And if we would have done a better job in the beginning, kind of explaining the vision, we probably would have had, not we probably, we definitely would have had less of that. So I would say we far did not a great job. Now I do think we are better about sharing the vision earlier and sharing like how we got there. You know, I mean, you know this. There's so many conversations that happen before we make a decision, but sometimes the team only hears the decision. You know, they missed the 6 months of like all the phone calls, all the back and forth. You know, when I was teaching full time, I would always change it first and see how it went. Like they miss all that. You know, now we try to we share more of that and try to make sure they're part of that journey with us of like getting there.
Yeah, that's really cool. And having to see like together, okay, what will we cut out? What will we keep? And obviously they might not agree with every single part, but they feel part of the conversation. It feels more like a team effort instead of like, here's a rule we're executing right now from the principal.
Also, I think for us too, leaving flexibility for the ones that love that stuff that still want to include it somehow. So that's kind of what I said in the beginning. Like some of our schools still teach weapons, you know, in their regular classes, and some do it totally separate as seminars. If they love it and they're passionate about it, you know, when you're passionate about something, like, you know, that transference of emotion, it makes your students better. They can have at it, knock yourself out. Like, you know, they love it. You want to do it with your team, so good. We're not super stuck on, no, it has to be this way. You know, there is that flexibility.
Yeah, and I think for people who maybe are uncomfortable with cutting some stuff out, like you could just move it into different areas like we did. Like, okay, we're not going to be testing on it, but once quarter, we'll do a weapons clinic or weapons camp. We'll do a nunchuck camp. And it'll be a special event on a Saturday where they can buy a nunchuck and we'll train with them for 2 hours. We'll give them some homework videos. And it's super fun. They like it. They still get to do it. But it's not part of testing time. It's not taking away from our practicing jab cross hook or jab cross knee or clinch knee turn elbow, right? It's like those basic things are going to make them better martial artists, better prepared, and what we're going to be more proud of when they're testing. And we feel like we did the right thing for them, not just like stuck to tradition. And then, so that's what we did with moving curriculum around with katas and techniques. My other question for you is, I know there's some stuff that we brought back. I mean, we made a mistake. We tried it for a couple of years and we brought back because we changed this stuff in what, maybe 2022, something like that.
Yeah,
Around
it's
there,
hard to
I
say.
think. So what stuff did we actually reverse and bring back that we cut out?
So one of the biggest improvements we made was definitely our self-defense, you know, kind of paring down from 81 to 27, being more, like you said, attack based, like, okay, someone's swinging, here's what you're doing. What we lost was, and for any of the Kempo people out there, one of the very cool parts about Kempo, like the self-defense, I think, is some of the complexity of it is such good teaching moments. And there's so many kind of like martial arts theory that is important that, you know, we learned growing up doing it that we did lose in like the simpler version of the self-defense, if that makes sense, right? Because, you know, if you're doing it more of like a Krav way, which is kind of some of our inspiration, there's less of that, right? It's still there, just, you know, different than we're kind of used to packaging it. So anyway, what we've been doing recently, and probably in the past only like 6 months, is bringing back some of the older, like longer Kempo techniques that we recognize you'd probably never do in like a full sequence as self-defense, but there's really good teaching opportunities in there. And it gives us a way to kind of level up our instructors, especially our newer instructors that didn't grow up learning that, and also teaching some of the theory in still like a fun way. So now if you were watching our adult class, you'd see a little bit of a mix. Some of the stuff that's just like block, strike, get out of there. Some of it that's a little bit more like traditionally old school Kempo, but the emphasis like the why, not necessarily the memorization, if I explain that okay.
Yeah, I think it's been that great. So what is the result been of actually changing?
I would say it's still pretty new, genuinely only in the past 3 to 6 months. My hope, so I'm not sure if I have a real result for you. My hope is that long term, our instructor, you know, the instructors become better. And at the end of the day, if your instructors are better, I think everything gets better. You know, classes are better, the students are better. It just lifts everything up. So if we do this call again a year from now, I can tell you how it's working. I
Yeah.
can see for like, for me, I like that stuff. You know, I don't want to teach it in every class, but I like it. So when I teach, I have fun teaching it. And I think definitely our instructors that have been around a long time enjoy teaching it. And you know, that there is something too, like you have to be passionate about what you're teaching.
Mm. Yeah, and I think when we may have, I think, constantly make alterations to our dress, right, to our curriculum. But I mean, we really started this stuff like I think it was around 2022 is when I can recall, maybe 2023, but I think 2022. But like from what I've seen in our black belt testing is the basics are much better. Like the jab cross hook, the jab cross knee, jab cross, like stuff that like the punches are way sharper. Why? Because they're not doing weapons in class anymore. They're not taking away that time in class. They're not doing they don't have to memorize 81 techniques. And that stuff, when I'm watching the badge, pop, 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 it's way better than it was before. Is it exactly what we want it to be in a perfect world? Probably not. We probably still have a lot to learn, a lot more modifications to make, but it's way better than it was before, and we're more proud of our product.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Uh,
I misunderstood your question. I thought you meant
yeah.
most recent.
I said, yeah,
You're
no.
talking about
You're
the
like,
start of this
no.
journey? Oh, you're 1,000. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah, 1,000%. Right. When I look at it now, yeah, there were we all always had those one or two people that looked awesome. The challenge is when you looked at the other 22, it wasn't that. No, 100%. It's definitely elevated. Yeah, 1,000%.
Yeah, and I know that like when you have an A student that looks good, it's easy to be like, this person's bad. Look how good they are. And then like squint your eyes, the other people or ignore them. Like, well, they didn't practice that much. But no, you didn't teach enough. Like you shouldn't judge an instructor by their best student who's super committed. You should judge them by their B or C students, right? How do you lift up all those other people? That's what matters more than like the student who, no matter where they trained or what they did, they're just athletic or they're committed. They would probably prosper anywhere. So anyway, is there anything else you want to add? Anything else you feel like another martial arts school would want to know if they're figuring out how to cut their curriculum to make it simpler, easier for their staff, to make them have better students?
I think that cutting I don't know, I'm sure you'll have some questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I think the other piece, and you kind of said this, it's not just cutting it down, but it's also making sure the rest of the curriculum supports it. Meaning, just teaching less doesn't get anybody better. It's, in our opinion at least, paring it down, but making sure the class is lots of feedback and, purposeful practice. And I think, and you can still have crummy students and only teach, a couple of things. You need both. You need to the curriculum needs to serve it, but then what you're doing in the class needs to serve whatever you want that end product to be.
Yeah, and of course with like repetition that's disguised. If you're like, all right, well, we're gonna do jab for 30 minutes, my kids are gonna get best at the basic. They're gonna get bored, and they're gonna train past a certain point, and they're never gonna get good anyway, right? You still have to have it be exciting and fun and train in different ways, but there's many different ways to train the basic techniques. And the analogy I like to use is like LeBron James is the best at jump shots and layups. He's not the best at 360 dunks. If he was the best at 360 dunks, he'd be on the Harlem Globetrotters, but he's not. He's an NBA All-Star and NBA champion. And those are always people that are best at the basics. So if you want your students to be in the game for a really long time and be able to be good at their sport and martial art, then the basics are going to matter more. And the 360 dunk can be practiced, in between classes or at special events or that fun stuff to kind of support it. So thank you so much for coming on here. If you're listening right now and you're like, hey, this is really cool, I want to find out more how to do this for my school, or you want to grow your martial arts school organically, reach out to me, Matthew at wdojo.com or on Instagram at blackbeltbrenner1. Hope this was helpful, guys.